Okay, so for the multiplier. But before we do, just to burn it into the deepest recesses of your soul, there's our formula, right? The idea behind the multiplier is that when someone spends money, it winds up turning into a lot more spending. And it goes back to the circular flow. Money keeps just flowing around and around and around. So when people earn income, they do something with it. They spend it. And so we're going to go through an example of how a little bit of spending turns into a lot of spending. Our example is going to use a guy, let's say his name is Joe, and let's say he has an MPC of zero point 0.6. Let's say everyone has an MPC of zero point 0.6. And he's walking down the street and he finds this $100 bill on the ground. Now remember, MPC is marginal propensity to consume. At this point, you know that that means he's going to spend 60% of that $100. And today you're going to see why MPC, of all the acronyms, APC, APS, MPS, MPC is the most important one. So Joe's walking down the street, he finds this $100 bill. We know that if he has an MPS, he's going to spend 60% of that $100. He's going to spend 60 bucks. So let's play that through. He goes into a candle store, Sue's Candle Emporium, and he spends his 60 bucks on candles because he's a romantic guy. Well, when he does that, it has an effect on C, consumption. Consumption's going to go up by $60, right? But that's not the end of the story. Because Sue now has $60 that she didn't have before, and she also has an MPC of zero point 0.6. So she's going to spend 60% of her change in income, which is $60. 60% of $60 is $36. That other 24, right, she's going to put away and save. So now GDP's gone up again, initially by 60 and now by 36 more. But of course, that's not the end of the story. Sue spends that 36 bucks somewhere, let's say Tim's ice cream shop. He's got an MPC of zero point 0.6. He wants to spend money too. So he spends 60% of it, and on it goes. GDP just keeps on going up. 60% of 60% of 60%. That initial change in spending by Joe, you could see, turns into a lot more spending. And it gets multiplied, hence the name multiplier. And I'll leave it to you to think about when that would have to end. Basically, well, you can think it through. If you want to see that all played out again, we could start and look at it in rounds. Joe finds $100, that's his change in income. If his MPC is zero point 0.6, he spends $60 of it, and he's going to save 40% or $40 of it. Remember, MPS plus MPC always have to equal 1. There's only two things you can do with your money. Sue takes the 60 bucks, spends 60% of it, which is 36 bucks. Tim's takes that 36 bucks, spends 60% of it, and on it goes. And if you add up that last column, 60 plus 36 plus 21, you could see that that initial $100 find on the street turns into quite a bit of spending. Well, you can go through a process like that to try to figure out exactly how much spending, which you could see is going to be pretty laborious. But fortunately, there's a formula or two that's going to help us out. So what we're looking at here is the first formula. The eventual change in GDP, that eventual additional amount of spending that goes on, is it going to be equal to this multiplier, this sum effect, times that initial change in spending. And in our example, that initial change in spending was 60 bucks, right? That's what Joe found on the Joe found 100 bucks and then spent $60 of it. That was the initial change in spending. So let's say someone decides to spend $1,000. Let's say Joe had walked into Sue's store and spent $1,000 there. If the multiplier was 5, GDP would go up by $5,000. Fortunately, there's also a formula for the multiplier itself, and this is where MPC comes in. The multiplier is equal to 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. And since MPC and MPS always have to add up to equal 1, there's an alternative formula, 1 divided by MPS, which is equal to 1 minus MPC. So you can try these out, and you might want to whip out a calculator and pause the video at certain points to see if you can figure it out. Let's say a business goes and decides to buy some machine, right? We call that investment. That's spending, right? Business walks into wherever, Best Buy, and spends money there for some capital good. If MPC is zero point 0.8, if everyone's going to spend 80% of their income, right? Best Buy takes that money, it pays their employees, the money all eventually funnels back to households. So how much is GDP going to rise? Well, think it through. The formula, change in GDP is equal to the multiplier times the initial change in spending. You might want to pause the video and see if you can figure out what the change in GDP is going to be. Welcome back. All right, so that change in GDP is equal to the multiplier, and we know the formula for the multiplier is 1 over 1 minus MPC, and MPC here is 0.8, times the initial change in spending, which is here $100. The multiplier here is going to be equal to 5 times $100 to get the change in GDP, which is going to be $500. Here, you could try another one out. Because the multiplier applies to anyone spending any additional money. Let's say the government decides to spend some money by spending money on roads, right? That money is going to find its way to construction workers and all sorts of people, right? One person spending, etc. So the government spends $300 billion on roads. Let's say everyone's MPC is 0.75. How much is GDP going to go up? Pause the video and come back and see if you're right. All right, formula. If MPC is 0.75, I'm going to plug that in to find the multiplier. 1 over 1 minus 0.75 is 1 over 0.25, which is 4, times 300 billion. GDP is going to go up by 1,200 billion, which is 1,200 billion. I think you're getting the idea as to how it works. Try this little quirk, just a slight little quirk. Let's say the government wants to make GDP go up by $500 billion. Let's say they know how much they want GDP to go up. And let's say they know that everyone's MPC is 0.5. How much money are they going to have to spend to get GDP to do that? Pause it and then come back. All right, here's the formula. This time we're solving for that initial change in spending, right? We know what we want the change in GDP to be, and we know what the multiplier is going to be once we plug in MPC. We just have to figure out that change in spending. Here the multiplier is going to be 2, which means that if they want GDP to go up by 500 billion, they can just spend 250 billion and theoretically make that happen. All right, that's it for this one. Next time, a couple different kinds of multipliers.
Well, that was a waste of time. Jamie, school is never a waste of time.
Since we have 15 minutes until recess, please put down your pencils and stare at the front of the room.